Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 14. In this lesson, we are going to look at how to plan our class project, and then we are going to look at how to create a specification document and define the scope that we want for the project. My name is Mildred. This lesson starts part 3 of this course, and all we do in part 3 is just develop our system. We will try to create the back end of a fully functional system. The project for this course is a maternity data collection system. We are going to try to collect information about pregnant women, and then let's see what we need this information for and why we're collecting this information. In part 2 of this course, we had created our directory, maternity records. We learned how to use SQLAlchemy to connect to a database and then to read from or to create tables into the database. We did that in our app file where we had all our connection script. We also looked at how to create environment files, and we have all of our secrets or every sensitive information in our environment file. And we are going to look later on at how to push this to a repository and ignore pushing all of the sensitive information off of our system. Now, my information is not sensitive because this is just something I'm creating just for the class purpose. We also look at how to manage dependencies. We use poetry and refer to week 13's lesson to refresh your knowledge on this. So before you get to part 3, you want to make sure that all of the topics discussed in part 2 are well understood. Okay, so when we want to create a project, we always have something called a software requirement document, and this outlines the project, gives the scope, the functional requirements. We can even have non-functional requirements, security requirements. Different people create it differently, but these are some basic things that has to be there, like user interface design, the system architecture, the data requirements, security requirements, like I mentioned earlier. If you're collecting personal identifiable information and you want to encrypt the information, different security requirements, performance requirements also there. Some people have testing requirements. We can have project timelines, and those timelines will state like the tags, the start and end dates for those tags. If there are revisions to maybe the version, the date of the revision, the description, and then sometimes you have signature for maybe the product owner, project manager, and things like that. So we have all of these requirements, but for us, we want to create a system, and I want to teach you to think like a developer, because in the real world, sometimes we do not have people who want something and know exactly what it is they want. They don't know the full requirements of what they want, and your job as a developer is to be able to understand their requirements document, be able to research and know what kind of data they need to collect, and also what is the end goal, what is it, what problem are they trying to solve. Because again, you can design a whole software, but what does it do? What problem does it solve? What is the end result? Are you collecting meaningful data? Are you collecting data that can be used? If you know the end goal, then you know exactly what it is that you are designing, what records you want to collect, and what is the target. Now, I have a set of forms you'll find in your course resource that are downloaded off the internet, but trying to put together some forms that we can actually create a software based on. We want to create maternity record that will record all of the pregnancy activities to birth, labor, vet if any, for a pregnant woman. We first of all want to have something that registers every expectant mother, create an antenatal account, and then within the antenatal account, whenever they're pregnant, we want to register the pregnancy and have encounter forms for every antenatal visit for each pregnancy. So we want to create a structure such that the maternity file created for a particular client can store multiple pregnancies. So if we register a pregnancy now, at the time the child is delivered, we want to say that this pregnancy is done or completed, and then subsequent pregnancies will still be registered under the same maternity record, so that all of the pregnancy, all of the maternal records for a particular client is linked together in one file, where the maternity record can hold multiple pregnancies for one person, but one person cannot have multiple maternity records. Okay, so we want to do that. So in this structure, we want to have like a maternity registration, and then we have a pregnancy registration, then we have a pregnancy encounter and follow-up for each time the client comes for their normal checkup or visit. Then we want to also have like a labor record, and we want to have a referral record. Then we have this pathograph record that we have where active labor is monitored and is recorded. Then we have the postpartum record, and then medical certificate or cause of death if it results to loss of life. Okay, So these are like some basic things that we want to collect information about. But what will this field hold? Why are we collecting this information? What is the target? So we have these forms. This form is like a maternity service self-referral form. We're not going to duplicate this form, but it gives us an idea on what a maternity registration form will look like, what kind of field. And then from this, we can now design what our field will be. We have another form, which is the prenatal registration form. We can actually use this to see how we can do our pregnancy registration form. So we register for antenatal, then we register the pregnancy under the antenatal record. We know what information we want to collect. This form will give us an idea. We're not copying this form. We're going to use our own knowledge and research to do this properly. Then for the pregnancy encounter and follow-up, we have forms that we can use as an idea to see the progress of the pregnancy for each visit and based on the gestation of the client. Then we also have this labor record where we are going to use this form to have an idea on what fields, what data we're collecting during labor of the client. We have this form that we call the referral record, where if the baby is now born, we're referring the baby or the mother, whatever referral we're doing, we have an idea of what the referral will be. Now the pathograph record is where we want to record active labor. So it's like an active labor monitoring form. We have an idea of what is being recorded, and so we know the form fields that we're getting out of this. We have the postpartum record form, where we also use to record information about the outcome of the pregnancy and all of the visits of the mother for a certain period of time. And if the pregnancy results in the death of the mother or the child, we have a medical certificate or cause of death form that we'll use to guide. So we have enough information to build a little software just for demonstration. We are not going to build a whole large scope of what an antenatal system will look like, but this will give you an idea to help you in your final project. And you want to keep the scope as little as possible just for the sake of your grades, and then you can go on after graduation to build anything you want to build and launch anything you want to launch. Okay, so let's start creating our document. We want to have, let's just write a title for this and say this is software requirement document. So we have said that we have these forms, and one of the first things we want to do is to have a maternity registration. Let's put this as the scope of the project. But when you're writing this document, you want to have like a product information, let's say product information heading. So you style your heading properly later, and this information is going to consist of let's say the project name is going to have the project owner, is going to have, let's say, the version, and then we'll have like the date. Okay, so you fix the information here. So I expect you, when you submit your deliverable 2 for your final project, that you submit it with this document attached, so we can have an idea of what it is that you are doing and how you want to go ahead with it. Okay, you might want to provide an introduction to guide anybody reading your document. Most of the time, you see, this document will be provided for you by the client, by the product manager. There'll be an idea. Sometimes you have to write this. Most of the time, from my experience, you even have to write the document, especially when you are building internally used products within your company or organization. You want to submit product to a project manager. You might have to write this product yourself. You have an idea of the functionality, the scope, whatever it is that you want to build. Or you are building, we are a startup that build different systems for different people. They might give you a business requirement that you need to maybe develop this into a requirement document for different levels of approval. The structure is different, but basically this gives you an idea of the kind of things that happen in the real world. So the introduction, let's say this document outlines the requirements for developing maternity data software, and we can do that, and then you can put more information and give a broad introduction. Sometimes you can even want to put the product overview here, so that you have an idea of what it is you're thinking about, what it is that you want to do. So you can have a product overview, and we'll say something like the maternity data software or web application is a class project that is designed to teach students how to gather requirements for a project, and we'll say this project should register all expectant mothers, creating a maternity record for the mothers, and within this record we want to register all pregnancies for the client, past, present, and we want to be able to track each person's data across multiple pregnancies. Okay, so you write all those overview like that, and then you have something we call the scope. So what is the scope? Let's define the scope as the different features we want to create. Let's say we'll create feature 1 and we want this to be maternity registration. We can later now create the functional requirements for feature 1, for feature 2, for feature 3, all of the features. But let's put a scope of what we want to do. So let's say feature 2 will now be pregnancy registration, and let's say feature 3 will now be pregnancy encounter and follow-up, and we'll have feature 4, let's say this will be the labor record, and then feature 5 we'll say let this be the referral record. Then we'll have feature 6 and we'll call this the active labor monitoring. I think they call it the pathograph record, like this. And then we'll have feature 7, and let's call this feature 7 the postpartum record. Let's have a feature 8 and we'll put this as the medical certificate of cause of death. So we have our scope. These are the functionalities, or these are the scope of the product that we want to have. We want it to have these are like broad headings, and then we can now have the functional requirements, and these functional requirements will now say something like, there are different ways you can do this, but basically these are the structure. Feature 1, you want to put the requirements description like this. So I'm going to do it a little different for this class. Now on your course resource you find all of the forms that are used to get an idea. You can create it whichever way you want, create your own new ideas, your own structure the way you want, but this should guide you in doing things properly. So when we have the requirements description, let's say we want for the maternity registration, we want to collect mostly personal information, and the information we want to collect are the names, that's the first, middle, last name, the alias if the person has preferred name or known name. We want to collect the date of birth, the title of for the name, prefix, suffix. We want to get the sex assigned at birth. We want to get the gender identity, sexual orientation, pronouns, ethnicity, maybe the telephone number, email address, occupation, highest level of education. We also want to get information about, maybe they have hospital registration number or something that uniquely identifies the client's record. We want to get like the address, street, city, country, zip code. When we get the address, we want to get the length of stay in that address. Why is that important? And that's why I say you want to know the end result. Are you going to be tracking infectious diseases across people? You want to know the locality where they come and test more positive, or the locality where a particular thing happens amongst pregnant people. These are a lot of information that you might want to track, and then we'll discuss that at the end of this lesson. We want to see like the length of stay at that address, the languages spoken, if it's like a country with multiple languages, or a country that maybe there's a possibility that the person will not understand the language of instruction. You want to know the languages spoken, emergency contacts and the relationship with the emergency contact. We want to have things like the GP name. So depending on the country and how the medical system is structured, they might have their own family doctor or GP, and then the contact of that person. Then we want to see if they have any military affiliation, active military, retired, and all that. So for all of these that I just mentioned, we want to give each account a unique identifier. So this is where you think like a developer, where you collect this information, but on the form you are not collecting any information like this is the unique ID for this client. You want it to be generated at the back end and then saved in the database, which means that when we process the form field information, we will have an additional field that will auto generate, maybe based on an algorithm or whatever we want, but we want a particular code that is unique to the account to say this maternity record, this is the ID to retrieve the record. And once that record is retrieved, then we can see the list of pregnancies, past pregnancies and the current one. And then we can now click on whatever pregnancy we want to get into and look at the records for that pregnancy, or get appointment, or record information or things like that. Okay, so we will get an algorithm that we want to use to say what algorithm do we use to automatically generate the unique identifier for the maternity record. That is not something that will be on the front end, it is a back end thing. So in this course we want to try as much as possible to avoid the use of forms and templates, but just build functions that processes forms that will now be built later. Because if you go into a company structure, you have front end developers, we have back end developers. Back end just build all of these features, classes, methods, whatever it is to process this information, and the front end will now build all of the routes and the forms and everything that connects to this backend to process this information. Okay. Also, on the maternity registration form, we have personal information that we do not want to store in plain text. By standard practice, you want to store personal information encrypted. So that's feature 1. I just said it, I'm not going to type it, but that's an example of how you write your document. So the feature 2 that we have there is pregnancy registration. So once you fill out one pregnancy, all the relevant fields should auto-populate in subsequent pregnancies. So if I fill all of the events of this pregnancy, the subsequent pregnancy, I do not want to fill in those information. We want a situation where it will just be retrieved. Information from all pregnancies will be retrieved in a summary for a new pregnancy. So by the time we register a new pregnancy, and let's say for instance, this is the 3rd pregnancy, the 3rd time we're registering a client's pregnancy. Now, maybe in the first pregnancy, we have recorded information about previous deliveries and how many children the client has and the outcome of the deliveries. We don't want to record the same information in the 3rd pregnancy. We've collected it in the first. What we want to do in the 3rd is to have just one field to either record the outcome of the last pregnancy if it wasn't recorded on the system, and if it's on the system, you want to auto-populate the outcome of the last pregnancy based on all of the other forms filled in the pathograph and the postpartum record and the labor record and all those records. Okay, so for the pregnancy registration, we have a form that will guide us to have an idea of the type of information that the pregnancy registration form will hold. And one of the first things we want to hold is the first day of the last menstrual period. If it's IVF, we want the date of embryo transfer, current gestation, expected date of delivery. Now normally with JavaScript, we might not even need to start counting what's the current gestation from the last LMP. You want the system to use the current date and the date of last menstrual period filled in to just auto populate that field. So that will be something that you always want JavaScript to do or do on the front end. Or we can still do it on the back end, but it's just better to use JavaScript to do those things on the front end. And so we're not going to bother about that and put it as a front end work. The same thing, the current gestation and the expected date of delivery. We'll have an algorithm that calculates the expected date of delivery based on the last menstrual period. And so this structure helps us to know what fields are required when we create when we're processing our form data, so that we can say that there must be records in this field. If not, give a warning to the user or an error to the user to fill in that field, or you don't send the record to the database. You also want to fill the number of previous pregnancies. That if it's not auto-populated, this is the first time a pregnancy record is created on the system for the client. The number of previous pregnancies, the previous pregnancy outcome and gestation at birth. The outcome is miscarriage, or the child was born alive, is alive. The child is alive but later died, or was born stillbirth. If previous abortions, if any, and the details. If the previous pregnancies had medical problems like high blood pressure, like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, severe bleeding, and all of those complications for the previous pregnancies. You want to collect the medical history, the medical conditions that the client has before pregnancy. You want to check if there are mental health conditions or concerns. You want to check if there are heart conditions, if the client has a high blood pressure, the child has the history of recurrent urinary tract infections, if there's any bowel, stomach, or liver conditions, if the client has blood conditions like sickle cell or blood clots, and the others, if the client has endocrine conditions like diabetes or thyroid disease, the client has neurological conditions like stroke and epilepsy, if the client has difficulty breathing, like asthma, if the client has any autoimmune conditions or skin conditions or cancer. Then you also want to collect information about the current medications and the client's personal circumstance, things like domestic violence, homelessness, use of recreational drugs, alcoholic, and those things. Then on the pregnancy registration, we also want to get risk information, how to flag this pregnancy has either high risk or not. And then the risk information will, if we want to do auto flagging to have alerts on the pages, we want to look at maternal age. I think For some countries, if the maternal age is less than 17, it will be flagged as high risk. If it's greater than 35 or thereabout, it's flagged as high risk. So things like that. So you would see if you need to create flags, and so those are the things you use. So we have risk information where we collect behavioral risks, like things like smokes more than 10 cigarettes per day or less than 2 since the last pregnancy, or offered if the client smokes more than 10 cigarettes per day or use substance in pregnancy, if the client has psychological risks, like the client is an adolescent, or inadequate finances, or inadequate housing, or inadequate social support, or is involved with other agencies, right, or has less than high school education, if the client has poor nutrition or any history of psychiatric condition, if the client has learning disability. Okay, we also want to look at the medical risks to see if the client has any cardiac disease, diabetes, endocrine disorder, gastrointestinal disorders, hyperthyroid or hypothyroid, or any malignancy, or moderate to severe asthma or renal disease, or history of urinary tract infections and seizures disorder if the client has sickle cell disease. We also want to look at the obstetric risk, if there's any abnormal pap smear, anemia, if the BMI is greater than 30, if the client has gestational diabetes, if the client has history of cervical uterine infections, if the history of infant with brain injury or neurological defects or congenital abnormality, if there's a history of infertility or inadequate prenatal care, history of low birth weight, infant incompetent cervix, if there is any IUGR, placenta previa or placenta abruptia. There's just a lot of this information. If you refer to the form, you have an idea of those different kind of risk category, but we are going to do them in class when we start creating our models for you to see. Okay, so feature 3 again, we have pregnancy encounter and follow-up. We'll define what the fields for the pregnancy encounter and follow-up will be. We'll look at the labor record. We'll define what the fields for labors will be. Labor record will be the referral record, what the fields of the information we're collecting will be, and then we'll look at the postpartum, the pathograph, the postpartum, and the certificate of death, what information it is going to collect. Okay, so what are we trying to track? What do we want to achieve with all this data we want to process or collect and send to the database? So is there an effort to enforce compliance regarding the standard and timely screenings to track mother to child transmission of different infectious diseases, or is it I want to track maternal or child mortality in maybe subgroups or across different age groups? When you have those kind of requirements, you want to make sure that your data captures date of birth and your data captures ethnicity. So knowing exactly the end result, know exactly the fields that you need. Are you trying to capture a particular risk where it is more prevalent? You have to know that your risk information has to contain all of those fields. Are you trying to track the most prevalent risks in pregnancies? You want to be able to say for every pregnancy registration we should capture all the data about the different risk factors. So it will help if you have an end goal and what problem you're trying to solve. When you know the problem you're trying to solve, it will ensure complete data capture. And in the next lesson, we will plan and we will create our class project. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.